Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When Tom Hale moved his family to their dream home, nestled on 8 acres of pristine Colorado forest, he thought he'd found peace. But a single camping trip with his sons turned his sanctuary into a battleground. Faced with HOA President Karen Watson's relentless power play, Tom was forced to fight for his land and his rights. Tom Hale leaned back in his chair, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the forest surrounding his house. This place was his sanctuary. After years of saving and dreaming, he and his wife Emily had purchased their dream home, a cozy 2-story house on a sprawling 8-acre property. Located in the serene outskirts of a small Colorado town, it was a perfect retreat from the constant hustle of city life. Here, nature ruled. Towering pines surrounded a sparkling lake, and the tranquil rustling of leaves provided a melody of peace. For Tom, this property represented more than just a home. It was a chance to give his sons, 10-year-old Oliver and 8-year-old Lucas, a childhood filled with adventure and discovery. Growing up in a small apartment himself, Tom had always craved the freedom to roam, explore, and connect with the outdoors. Now, with the purchase of this land, he could provide his children with what he never had, a playground shaped by nature itself. This weekend was special. Inspired by his childhood dream of camping under the stars, Tom planned a small, low-stakes camping trip on their own land to teach his boys the basics. The idea was simple. Set up a tent near the lake, build a campfire, and teach them how to fish and cook over an open flame. Emily, ever practical and supportive, prepared snacks and extra supplies, although she preferred the comforts of home over the wild. Tom's excitement, however, was infectious, and the boys had spent the entire week eagerly anticipating their first wilderness adventure. By mid-afternoon on Saturday, the plan was in full swing. Oliver and Lucas, with their small backpacks slung over their shoulders, eagerly followed Tom to a clearing near the lake. The water sparkled under the summer sun, a mirror to the endless blue sky above. The boys giggled as they struggled to pitch the family-sized tent under their father's watchful eye. Nearby, Tom stacked rocks into a makeshift fire ring and began gathering fallen branches for kindling. The day was idyllic. Oliver successfully cast his fishing line for the first time, and Lucas, who had initially struggled, finally caught a small trout. Tom couldn't stop smiling as he showed them how to clean and prepare the fish for cooking. The smell of smoke mixed with the fresh air as the fish sizzled over the campfire, filling the air with the scent of adventure. As the evening approached, Tom began telling stories from his own childhood, painting a vivid picture of imagined bear hunts and treasure-laden hikes. The boys listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder as the golden hour cast a warm glow over their camp. The crackling of the fire was the perfect soundtrack to their laughter and shared moments. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. The first sign of trouble came as the light faded into dusk. From the dense tree line, the unmistakable sound of snapping twigs echoed. Tom turned, his expression shifting from relaxed to alert. Emerging from the forest was a woman in her mid-50s, flanked by 2 men. She was dressed sharply, her bright white sneakers spotless despite the dirt path. Her expression was anything but friendly. "Excuse me," she shouted, her voice sharp and cutting through the calm like a whip. "What is going on here? You can't be doing this." Tom stood slowly, gesturing for his sons to stay by the fire. His first thought was concern. Had something happened in the neighborhood? But her tone quickly told him otherwise. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Tom asked, trying to maintain his composure. "I'm Karen Watson, president of the HOA," she snapped, pointing an accusatory finger. "And what you're doing here is completely unacceptable. Open flames, camping, fishing. This is a residential area, not a campground." Tom blinked in confusion. "This is my land. We're not bothering anyone." Karen's eyes narrowed, a smug smile tugging at her lips. "Actually, this is part of the community managed by the HOA. And as president, it's my responsibility to enforce our rules. Camping, fishing, and especially open fires are strictly prohibited." Tom felt his chest tighten with frustration, but kept his voice calm. "I'm sorry, but you're mistaken. This is private property. I bought this land, and it's not part of any HOA. Karen crossed her arms. "We'll see about that. If you think you can play games here, you're sorely mistaken. Show me your ownership documents, or I'm calling the police." Tom sighed deeply, his patience already wearing thin. His house, and the necessary paperwork, was just a 5-minute walk away. But Karen's hostility made it clear that logic might not be enough to diffuse the situation. "It's getting dark," Tom said, his voice measured. "Why don't we walk to the house? I can show you everything there." Karen scoffed. "You think I'll just take your word for it? No, we'll wait right here. I'm calling the police to sort this out." Tom could feel the tension in the air as his sons glanced at him nervously. He tried to reassure them with a smile, but inside, he was simmering. How had a peaceful family moment turned into this? He pulled out his phone, calling Emily to bring the documents. As he hung up, he caught Karen raising her own phone to film the scene. "Don't even think about packing up," she barked. "This is evidence." Tom turned away from her, focusing on keeping his sons calm. "We'll sort this out," he assured them, though the weight of the confrontation was already pressing down on his shoulders. The quiet camping trip had turned into something far more chaotic, and Tom could only hope it wouldn't escalate further. The air around the campfire grew colder, though Tom suspected it had less to do with the fading sunlight and more with the escalating tension. Karen paced near the lake, her pristine sneakers crunching against the gravel. She continued recording the scene on her phone, pausing only to bark commands at the two men who had accompanied her. One was holding a clipboard and appeared unsure about the situation, while the other stood with his arms crossed, silently nodding along to Karen's rants. "You think you can just waltz in here, set up a bonfire, and endanger this entire neighborhood," Karen said, spinning around to face Tom, her phone still aimed at him. Tom sighed, his patience thinning. He turned to his boys, who were now sitting on a log, their earlier excitement replaced by confusion. "Oliver, Lucas, start gathering your things," he said gently. "Don't you dare move anything," Karen snapped, her voice shrill. "This is a violation of HOA rules, and everything needs to remain exactly as it is for the police to see." Tom straightened, narrowing his eyes at her. "You're on my land. I'm not part of your HOA, and you don't have the authority to dictate what happens here." Karen laughed coldly, stepping closer to him. "That's what you keep saying, but without proof. I have every right to intervene. You've put this entire area at risk with your recklessness, and I'm not going to let it slide." Tom clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath to stay calm. "I've already called my wife. She's on her way with the paperwork. This will all be cleared up soon." Karen didn't respond. Instead, she turned to one of the men and muttered something before continuing to pace. Tom's phone buzzed, and he picked it up to see a text from Emily. "On my way. Be there in 5. Relief washed over him briefly, though Karen's relentless attitude left him on edge. Minutes later, Emily arrived, carrying a folder with the property deed and survey maps. She approached cautiously, glancing at Karen and the men, then at her husband. "Here," she said, handing Tom the documents. "Perfect timing," Tom said as he flipped through the pages. Holding them out toward Karen, he added, "This should clear up any misunderstanding." Karen, however, didn't bother looking at the papers. She waved him off with a dismissive gesture. "Save it for the police. They're the ones who'll decide what's real and what's not." Tom felt his frustration building, his voice sharpening. "You're wasting everyone's time. Why don't we walk to the house together and end this nonsense?" Karen crossed her arms, her expression smug. "Oh no, we're staying right here. The police will handle this, and I'll make sure they see the full extent of your violations." Tom turned to Emily, who now held Lucas's hand tightly, her other arm draped protectively around Oliver's shoulders. It was getting colder, and the boys were shivering. Deciding he'd had enough, Tom said, "I'm taking my family back to the house. The boys need to get warm." Karen immediately pulled her phone back up, recording as she shouted, "Leaving the scene won't help you. This is a crime, and you'll be held accountable." Tom ignored her, gathering his son's belongings, while Emily led them back toward the house. Her reassuring words to the boys were punctuated by Karen's angry shouts in the background. Once the family was safe inside, Tom returned to the campsite. By now, flashing blue and red lights illuminated the lake, and 2 police officers were speaking with Karen. She gestured wildly toward the extinguished fire pit, showing them the video she had taken. Tom, with the property documents in hand, approached the scene, his resolve firm. "Evening, officers," he said calmly. "Let me explain what's really going on." The officers turned to Tom, their expressions neutral but professional. One of them, a tall man with a clipboard, gave a small nod. "We're here to investigate a report of unauthorized activity and potential safety violations. Are you the property owner?" Tom handed over the folder containing his documents. Yes, I am. This is my land, not part of the HOA jurisdiction. I have all the paperwork here to prove it. Karen interjected before the officer could respond. He's lying. He's endangering the entire neighborhood with that fire, and I've already explained the situation to you. He's clearly violating HOA rules, and we need to address this immediately. The officer raised a hand to silence her. Ma'am, we'll handle this. Turning his attention back to Tom, he examined the documents carefully. The second officer, a shorter woman with a calm demeanor, stepped closer to the extinguished fire pit. This fire's completely out, she remarked, crouching to inspect the area. Doesn't look like there's any ongoing risk here, Karen scoffed. That's irrelevant. He's already proven he has no regard for the rules. This land is within HOA boundaries, and he's breaking our regulations. The taller officer frowned and flipped through the documents Tom had provided. These records clearly show that this property is privately owned and not subject to HOA governance. There's no violation of jurisdiction here. He looked up at Tom. Your documentation checks out, sir. You're within your rights to be here. Tom nodded. Thank you. I've been trying to explain this all evening. Karen's face turned bright red as she stepped forward, her voice rising. This can't be right. You're missing something. I have evidence, videos, witness statements. Ma'am, the officer cut her off firmly. This is private property, and Mr. Hale has provided legal proof. There are no violations here. I suggest you respect his boundaries moving forward. Karen's fury boiled over. Boundaries? What about the safety of everyone else in this community? What about the fire risk he's posing? He's a danger. The shorter officer stood, brushing her hands off. Ma'am, I've inspected the area. There's no safety hazard. If you continue to escalate this, we'll have to consider this harassment. Is that what you want? Karen faltered, her eyes darting between the officers and Tom. Finally, she spat out, "This isn't over," before storming off into the dark with her entourage trailing behind her. Tom exhaled deeply as the officers handed him back his documents. "Thank you for your time," he said, his voice weary but grateful. The taller officer nodded. "No problem, sir. Just make sure you keep these records handy in case there's any further trouble." As the police cars disappeared into the night, Tom stood by the lake, staring at the embers of what was supposed to be a peaceful evening. The confrontation had been exhausting, but at least, for now, it seemed resolved. Or so he thought. He turned and headed back to the house, the weight of the day still pressing on him. Unbeknownst to him, this was just the beginning of Karen's relentless campaign. The peace of the following morning was short-lived. Tom woke up early, hoping to shake off the tension from the previous night and enjoy breakfast with his family. As he stepped onto his porch with a mug of coffee, he immediately noticed something odd. Bright red notices were plastered across the trees lining his property and even attached to his fence. He walked closer, pulling one of the papers off a tree. It was an official-looking document with the HOA's letterhead boldly displayed at the top. The notice read, "Violation Notice. Unauthorized activity detected on the property, illegal camping, fire hazard, and environmental disruption. Immediate cessation of all non-compliant activities is required. A fine of $2,500 will be issued if compliance is not met within 48 hours. Tom's stomach churned as he flipped through the other notices, all bearing the same accusations and threats. His name wasn't on any of them, but it was clear they were directed at him. He could feel the frustration from the previous night bubbling back. Inside the house, he showed the notices to Emily, who frowned as she read them. "This is harassment," she said firmly. "They have no authority here." "They don't," Tom agreed, his jaw tightening. "But they're trying to make me think they do." Later that morning, Tom's phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor he had met only briefly since moving in. The message was short but revealing. "Hey, just a heads up. Karen's been talking to the other HOA members about you. She's telling everyone you're a fire hazard and a threat to the neighborhood. Be careful. She doesn't let things go easily." By lunchtime, the situation worsened. Tom noticed Karen's car parked just outside his property line, her phone aimed directly at his house as she recorded videos. Occasionally, he saw her gesturing dramatically, as if narrating some imagined scene of wrongdoing. Her antics were accompanied by a second car with another HOA board member who appeared to be taking notes. "What is she even doing?" Emily asked, peering through the curtains. "She's building her case," Tom replied grimly. "Or at least trying to intimidate us." The pressure escalated further the next day when Tom came home from a hardware store run to find a group of workers on his land. A landscaping crew was cutting branches from trees near the lake and clearing undergrowth. Furious, he parked his truck and stormed over to the foreman. "Who gave you permission to do this?" Tom demanded, his voice barely controlled. The foreman, caught off guard, held up a clipboard. "We have a work order from the HOA. They said this area was out of compliance and needed to be brought up to standard." Tom's blood boiled. "This is my property, and the HOA has no jurisdiction here. You're trespassing. Pack up your gear and leave now." The foreman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, we're just following orders. You'll need to take this up with the HOA." Tom didn't waste another second. He pulled out his phone and recorded the crew, documenting the damage they had already done to his trees and the surrounding vegetation. He then called the police, reporting the unauthorized work. By the time the officers arrived, the crew had begun packing up, but the damage was done. Several saplings near the lake were destroyed, and the undergrowth was left in disarray. Karen appeared moments later, smugly watching from a distance as Tom explained the situation to the officers. When approached, she claimed that the HOA had every right to enforce its community standards and that she was acting in the neighborhood's best interest. Tom countered with the truth. "This is private property. I have the documents to prove it. This is destruction of property, and I'll be filing charges if this continues." Karen's mask of confidence cracked slightly, but she maintained her defiance. "We'll see what the courts say about this. You're out of compliance, and we're just doing what's necessary to protect everyone else." The officers sided with Tom, warning Karen and the HOA that any further unauthorized actions could lead to legal consequences. Despite the temporary relief, Tom knew this wasn't over. The damage to his land wasn't just physical, it was a direct attack on his rights, and Karen clearly wasn't finished. The situation came to a head one sweltering afternoon when Tom received an urgent call from his attorney, Mark Wilson. "Tom," Mark began, his tone grave, "the HOA just filed a formal complaint against you. They're claiming your property is within their jurisdiction and have submitted altered maps to the county records office to back it up." Tom felt his stomach drop. The brazenness of Karen's actions was beyond anything he had expected. "Altered maps?" he repeated. "That's fraud." "Exactly," Mark replied. "We need to act fast. I've already filed an injunction to stop any further actions on their part. But there's more." Tom braced himself. "What now?" "They're also claiming you violated environmental regulations by disturbing protected land." Karen's pulling every string she can. Anger surged through Tom. He wasn't just defending his family's peace anymore. This was a full-blown attack on his rights. He knew the fight had escalated to a point where compromise was no longer an option. A week later, the courtroom became the battlefield. Tom sat at the plaintiff's table beside Mark, while Karen and her team of HOA representatives sat across the aisle, their smug expressions barely masking their nervousness. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, wasted no time diving into the case. Mark began with a scathing opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is not about neighborhood harmony. It's about abuse of power. My client, Mr. Hale, owns private property, yet the HOA, led by Mrs. Watson, has unlawfully harassed him, vandalized his land, and now resorted to falsifying official records to claim jurisdiction where none exists." The courtroom murmured as Mark presented the evidence: Tom's original property deed, photographs of the damaged trees, and a side-by-side comparison of the real and falsified maps. The discrepancies were glaring. Karen's attorney attempted to counter, arguing that the HOA's actions were in the best interest of the community. Mr. Hale's activities posed a safety risk to neighboring properties, he claimed. The HOA acted responsibly to enforce community standards and maintain property values. But Mark was prepared. He brought out emails obtained during discovery, private exchanges between Karen and other board members. In one, Karen wrote, "If we pressure him enough, he'll cave. His land is the key to connecting Phase 3 of the development." Another email from a board member read, "Keep hitting him with fines. Nobody can hold out forever." The evidence was damning. Karen's motivations were exposed for all to see. Not safety, but greed. She and her associates had orchestrated a campaign to force Tom into selling his property at a fraction of its value, all to pave the way for a lucrative expansion project. The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed the evidence. "Mrs. Watson," she said sternly, "do you deny these emails?" Karen squirmed in her seat but remained silent. Her attorney tried to salvage the situation, stammering about misunderstandings, but the damage was done. The courtroom reached its peak when Mark called Tom to the stand. Calm but resolute, Tom recounted every incident: the camping trip, the harassment, the trespassing crew, and the altered maps. He ended with a powerful statement: "This isn't just about me. It's about standing up to bullies who think they can take what they want because they have power. I won't let them take what's mine. Not for me, not for my family, and not for anyone else who might face the same injustice." The judge adjourned for deliberation, but the verdict was clear long before she returned. When she finally delivered her decision, it was a decisive victory for Tom. Mr. Hale's property is unequivocally private and independent of the HOA, the judge declared. Furthermore, the actions of the HOA, particularly Mrs. Watson, demonstrate gross misconduct, including harassment, trespassing, and falsification of records. The court orders full restitution for damages, legal fees, and punitive measures against the HOA to ensure this never happens again. Karen's face drained of color as the gavel struck. Tom leaned back in his seat, feeling the weight of months of conflict begin to lift. He had won the battle, but the fight had revealed something deeper: the lengths people would go to for greed and the power of standing firm against injustice. The courtroom victory was a turning point, but the aftermath proved just as impactful as the trial itself. Within days of the judge's ruling, the HOA board members scrambled to save face. Karen Watson was forced to resign as president, her reputation in tatters. The board's remaining members convened an emergency meeting where they begrudgingly agreed to the court-mandated restitution. For Tom, the financial compensation was a much-needed win. The HOA was ordered to pay $30,000 for the damages to his trees and land, along with covering his legal fees. Additionally, the judge imposed punitive damages, requiring the HOA to set aside a $100,000 fund to compensate other property owners who had been similarly harassed. Karen's schemes were further unraveled as the local media picked up the story. A detailed exposé revealed her history of strong-arm tactics, with other homeowners stepping forward to share their experiences. One elderly couple, intimidated into selling their land for a fraction of its value, became the centerpiece of the article, sparking outrage in the community. Despite the public backlash, Karen attempted to deflect responsibility, claiming she acted in the community's best interest. However, her involvement in falsifying property maps and conspiring with developers to force land sales became impossible to deny. Faced with mounting pressure and the threat of criminal charges, Karen quietly left town. Meanwhile, the HOA underwent a complete overhaul. New leadership brought a dramatic shift in priorities, focusing on transparency and fair governance. Rules were rewritten to prevent the misuse of power, and board meetings became open forums for residents to voice concerns. For Tom, the resolution brought a profound sense of relief. With the court's decision firmly establishing his land as private and untouchable by the HOA, he finally felt secure in his home. The physical scars on his land, damaged trees, and disrupted undergrowth would take time to heal, but the symbolic victory was immediate. The settlement also inspired a ripple effect. Neighboring HOAs in the area began revising their own policies, hoping to avoid similar scandals. Property owners felt emboldened to stand up for their rights, citing Tom's case as a precedent. One quiet evening, as Tom sat by the lake with Emily and their boys, he reflected on the journey. What began as a simple family camping trip had evolved into a battle for justice, but it was one worth fighting. His land, his family's sanctuary, was safe, and the message was clear. No one had the right to take it away. The fallout from Tom's victory extended far beyond his 8-acre property. His case became a symbol of resistance against HOA overreach, inspiring others to stand up for their rights. Articles about the trial appeared in local and regional newspapers, detailing how one man's determination exposed systemic abuse. Homeowners across the state began questioning the authority of their HOAs, leading to calls for reform in communities plagued by similar issues. In Pine Ridge Estates, where Karen's reign had left scars of mistrust, the new HOA leadership worked to repair the damage. Meetings became transparent and inclusive, with board members focusing on maintaining common spaces rather than enforcing petty fines or harassing residents. They even reached out to Tom, apologizing for the actions of the previous board and promising to respect his property boundaries moving forward. For Tom, life slowly returned to normal. The damaged trees on his property began to recover, with careful replanting efforts ensuring that the natural beauty of the area would thrive again. His sons, Oliver and Lucas, frequently played by the lake, free from the fear of unwelcome interruptions. Tom and Emily hosted a small neighborhood barbecue where even residents who had initially sided with Karen admitted they were relieved by the changes. Beyond his own community, Tom became an advocate for property rights. Other homeowners contacted him for advice, and he shared his experiences openly, encouraging them to document everything and seek legal counsel when facing HOA overreach. His attorney, Mark Wilson, even cited Tom's case in seminars on protecting homeowners from predatory practices. As Tom reflected on the journey, he felt proud, not only for protecting his family's sanctuary, but also for creating lasting change. The struggle had been exhausting, but the outcome ensured that others might never have to face the same battle. The lake, the forest, and the freedom they represented remained untouched. A victory not just for Tom, but for everyone who valued their right to live peacefully on their own land. Sitting on his porch one quiet evening, Tom watched the sun dip below the horizon, its warm light casting a golden glow over the forest and lake. The land was peaceful again, free from intrusion and conflict. His sons played by the water, their laughter blending with the rustling leaves, a reminder of why he had fought so hard to protect this place. The battle with the HOA had been draining, but it taught Tom invaluable lessons. He had proven that even against organized power, standing firm with truth and determination could bring justice. The scars left by Karen's actions, both on his land and within the community, had begun to heal, replaced by stronger, fairer governance and a newfound unity among neighbors. Tom knew the fight wasn't just about his family's rights, but about setting a precedent for others. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes you don't fight just for yourself. You fight for what's right. And Tom had done just that.